We'll go somewhere else.
Oh, you guys are good.
No, I want to get down to you by the water. Okay, here, I'll film for you.
Got that in? We met this random guy today. Hey, oh!
Beer is good! Beer is good! Beer is good! It's done!
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 7 of the Beer Chasers. My name's Preston. This is John. Today we're here at the Sanford Homebrew shop to pick up some grains for my new all-grain setup.
Yeah, also while we're here today, we're going to talk to Aaron and Gary, pick their brains a little more about grains, yeast, and hops. Last time we went over the basics, but now we want to go into a little more detail and give you guys some more information about them.
Alright, stick around, check it out. Alright, we're here with a Mohawkless Gary, Sanford Homebrew shop. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming out, guys.
Well, no problem. So last time we were here, we kind of talked about the Sanford Homebrew shop in general and just kind of touched on the basics of homebrewing.
Right.
So today we wanted to kind of get a little more advanced and talk about some of the grains you guys carry.
Okay.
So how many different kinds of grains do you guys carry at the Sanford Homebrew shop?
We carry over 60 types of grains. That covers all the base grains, specialty grains, crystal, caramel, amber, brown, roasted. We also carry smoked malts, oats, wheat, a variety of different styles of wheat and oats and rye. We even have a chocolate rye up there that I'm itching to use in something.
Nice, man.
So yeah, we got it covered.
Yeah, so you basically can make every beer you can imagine.
Yeah, anything you
just
can
from the
find
shop.
out there. Yeah.
Cool. What's the grain you go through most, so your most common one that's bought?
Absolutely, American two-row. It's in every recipe that's out there. And I can tell you why, real quick. It's because most of the recipes out there are either based on older information or what breweries use. Two-row is amazingly cheap for the enzymatic power that it has, and so big breweries use it as their base malt because it doesn't cut into their bottom line. So a lot of home brewers kind of carry that over.
So I've heard the term 2 or 6 row grain. What exactly does that mean?
All right, 2-row and 6-row, basically when the grain sprouts, it will either sprout up in 2 or 6 different rows, and that is cultivated. The 2-row for the longest time has been said to have less enzymatic power or diastatic power to convert starches to sugars, and that the 6-row, although kind of weaker in flavor, had more power and more oomph behind it, more protein. That's not necessarily true anymore. We get the statistical analysis of the grains that we get in, and we read off, the diastatic power, how much the 2-row and the 6-row can convert starches to sugars, and they're getting near identical. And that becomes really important when you use things that can't convert itself, like wheat. Cannot convert itself. They're like certain adjuncts that are used that that have to be converted. They can't convert themselves.
Yeah, so when you say that word adjuncts, what exactly does that mean? How are they different than your normal malts?
Basically, when you're talking about malt, it's malted barley or malted wheat, malted rye or malted oats. And that basically just means that the soluble sugars in them are basically heated up to be made available. Those starches that turn into the soluble sugars, those starches within the grain, during the malting process, that just makes them so that they can be converted into sugars. Adjuncts would be something like corn, rice, any other type of fermentable, basically, and those can't convert themselves, but they do have soluble starch that can be converted into sugar in them, so they need something to convert that from.
So would an adjunct be considered something unmalted, or is that something totally different?
That's something totally different. Unmalted, you can get unmalted wheat, unmalted barley, unmalted rye. That is just raw grain. That's something that hasn't been treated. It hasn't been heated up in water to a certain degree and let germinate, and then air dried, which they call kiln. That would be malted versus unmalted. Unmalted would just be the raw grain itself with nothing done to it whatsoever.
Right, okay. Cool. Well, we appreciate the knowledge, and if we can, let's go ahead and move on to some hops.
Okay.
All right, so Gary has tagged in Aaron for the hops section of the interview here. So first thing we wanted to ask is how many different kinds of hops are here at the Sanford Homebrew shop?
Here, we've got probably 80 something. So it kind of fluctuates throughout the year, with the seasons. but we just added a whole bunch more this last week, so we're definitely up to maybe 90.
Now I see you guys got pellets in the jars. You got the whole cone, which is in that bag right in front of you. Some people might think it's something else, but what's the difference in using those? Why would you choose one over the other?
Definitely, like with the whole cone, you've got a more natural product. It's more traditional. A lot of people that just want to be more authentic, more traditional will use those. It's also in the pelletizing process. They take the whole cones here, which are just little flowers, look like little green pine cones. But once they're dried, they grind them up and then run them through a pelletizing machine, just like rabbit food, little pellets. And what that does is it cuts down on the surface area, so they stale or oxidize slower that way. With the whole cone hops, you preserve more of the oils, more of the natural kind of raw flavors in there. With the pellets, the machines get hot and it kind of heats them up a little bit, so you tend to lose some of that raw, earthy, grassy, leaf character to them. But they last a lot longer. For something that's only harvested once a year, you really want a nice shelf-stable, if you will, product, so that no matter when you're brewing, you've got nice, fresh, aromatic hops to work with.
So you mentioned kind of time of year and climate. So can hops be grown anywhere? Or do they only grow in certain climates, like at certain times of the year? Kind of what's up with that?
Yeah, they're an annual. Basically the rhizomes, the roots, will grow new vines every year. They'll die back down to the ground and come back the next year. Supposedly they only grow in the kind of moderate climate areas. I think originally they're from China, somewhere kind of out that way. They grow all through kind of, continental Europe, England, the U.S., kind of the northern half or another 2/3 of the U.S. And they also grow in the southern hemisphere, Australia, New Zealand. Supposedly Florida is kind of outside of that zone. Everyone says, you can't grow hops in Florida because the days don't get long enough and it doesn't get cold enough and it's too hot. But we grew a whole bunch of them this year and they did great. In fact, this whole bag is from my house. That was just from one of my Teton plants, and Teton was the one that supposedly is going to do the worst. And some of the other ones, I was picking 5-gallon buckets full of hops on the first year, so maybe they won't go back next year. I don't know what the deal is, but
Busting those nuts.
All right, so now we're on to yeast. So how many different kinds of yeast strains are available here at Sanford Homebrew Shop?
Here we've probably got at least 100. So there's a lot.
I see you guys got the white yeast, liquid yeast. You got some on the side of you there, the dry yeast.
Yeah.
What's the difference between using a dry versus a liquid yeast?
For the most part, the dry yeast, they're dehydrated. They have a much longer shelf life that way, but it's not a real healthy thing to do to them. They take a little bit more care to kind of bring them back, get them ready for fermentation. The liquid ones, these are actually propagated weekly for us. So they come in, they were just propagated this week or last week, and they're pretty much active and ready to go. They've got a nutrient pouch inside of there, a little kind of plastic bag in there with nutrient. So on the day you're going to brew, you take it out of the fridge, you pop that little bubble, shake it up, let it sit for a few hours, and they'll kind of get all excited and ready to go. So when you pitch them in your wort, they just take right off.
Well, so I understand there's probably different ale yeast, lager yeast, etc. But why are there so many different yeast strains? You say you have 100 different yeast strains here. Why is that?
Different strains of yeast will give you different characters. There's a few different things that we measure as far as yeast. The first one is attenuation, which means what percentage of the available sugar that they're going to consume. So you've got some yeast that will consume, maybe up to 80% of the available sugar, and some only 70%. So that difference is one beer is going to be nice and dry and crisp, the other beer is going to be a little bit sweeter, have a little more body to it. So if you're doing kind of a dry American pale versus like an English bitter or something like that, you choose a different yeast. They're also going to give you kind of corresponding with that is a different level of flocculation, which means at the end of fermentation they clump together and they sink at the bottom. So typically the The longer the yeast stays up in suspension, the more sugar it's going to eat and the more it's going to attenuate, give you a drier beer. But then it takes longer for the beer to clear up. So if you have a low attenuating yeast, they're going to kind of eat real quick, sink out really nice, get a nice clear beer, but with more body to it. They're also going to throw off different esters and phenols, which is going to give you some fruitier flavors in the esters. Kind of get your, like in a Hefeweizen, you get your banana and apple and pear, that kind of stuff. And the phenols are going to give you like that nutmeg, clove, maybe some smoky character in a Scottish ale. So depending on the type of beer you're making, you want the yeast that's going to throw those characteristic flavors into it.
Yeah, so some of the like higher alcohol beer recipes out there, some of them say use a yeast starter. What exactly is the yeast starter? What does it do? Why would you use one?
That's really to make sure that you have enough healthy, viable, active yeast going into the beer to get through the amount of sugar that you have in there for you to work on. If you take a, say an imperial stout or a barley wine that has a lot of work to do for the yeast, and you just throw a little bit of yeast in there, enough to do maybe half that much work, it's really going to stress them out. You're going to get a lot more of those phenols, which can turn kind of rubbery, plastic, and some other funky flavors in there. And you're not going to get the level of attenuation, the level of alcohol and dryness that you want in that beer. You're pretty much going to get halfway through and run out of energy.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. My beer knowledge has been increased. Hopefully everybody else has at home. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Alright, so now we're collecting the grains for the batch. The first thing you need is a bucket, something to put the grains into the bucket, and a scale what you see down here. And on the wall, as you saw earlier, there's all the grains we're going to be needing. We're going to weigh it out, measure it, all that stuff. First thing we're going to have is 6.5 pounds of German wheat. That's going to make up the majority of this beer.
Where this one's going at the beginning, but it's really the same thing. I would go with twice as much at the beginning is better than half as much later on when you're.
Alright, so we got 6.5 pounds of the wheat in here. Next step is getting 3.5 pounds of the Pilsner.
Spray it out.
Alright, so up next is a half a pound of dark Munich malt. What that's going to do is add a lot of sweetness and some dark color to the beer, give that nice color we're looking for. Alright, so now we got the 10.5 pounds of grains that this recipe calls for. We're going to mix them all up and then mill it. We're just going to crack the grains, open them up so the water can mix with it well, and get all those sugars we want out of the grains. You can probably see all the different colors of the grains. We got the mixture of the 3 different grains in here. Mixed up well so everything breaks up nicely. So this is the grain mill at Sanford Homebrew shop. They allow us to grab the grains we want, put them in here, crack them, and you just turn it on. And this spins 2 basically blades together, and it's like a traditional grain mill. So you just put it in and it adds it to this right here.
I can just write numbers in here, like, I charge the cash.
Alright, so now that all 10.5 pounds of grains are cracked, they're all filled out, we're going to weigh out the hops now. Now we're going to weigh out our 1 ounce of Tower hops, so a lot of the bitterness we're looking for in this Hefeweizen. Alright, so the last thing we have is the yeast. We're making a Weihenstephaner clone, so guess what? That's what the yeast we're using. This yeast is going to give us all those bananas, the clove, the esters we want. It's exactly the yeast that they use.
Alright, so that's going to wrap up this episode of The Beer Chasers. Definitely want to send a thank you to Gary for letting us come out and film today. If you haven't been to the Sanford Homebrew shop, you guys must do so.
Yeah, on the next episode, we're going to check out Preston's all-grain setup and also the works of his Hefeweizen.
Alright, until next time, we'll see you later.
Beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. And stop, beer is good, beer is good, beer is good. Let's go drink some beer.